My son Nicholas shall receive nothing from my estate, for reasons he knows well. That one line, brutal, cold, etched in legal ink, and read aloud by a visibly shaken Billy Crystal, in a room where silence fell like a guillotine. What kind of father would write something like that? And why would he need to? Because by the time those words were heard, Rob Reiner and his beloved wife Michelle were already gone. Stabbed, slaughtered, left to die in their $13.5 million Brentwood estate. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Their killer? Police say it was someone close. Too close. Their own son, Nicholas. But the world didn't learn the full story from a detective or a journalist. No, they learned it in the most gut-wrenching way possible, through a will. A last will and testament that didn't just divide wealth, it divided a family. It exposed wounds decades old. And it shattered the very image of the smiling, Oscar-nominated, family-first director America had adored for over 40 years. This is not just another Hollywood tragedy. This is the story of secrets, of betrayal, of a father's final act of love or vengeance, and of the son who allegedly destroyed everything. But before we get into the blood and horror, there's something you need to understand. This story didn't start the night of the murders. It started long before. Picture this. A sunny Sunday morning in Brentwood, California. The kind of morning where the air feels expensive, clean, cinematic. Rob Reiner's estate sits like a fortress of success, old Hollywood money wrapped in polished stone and flowering vines. Inside, Rob and Michelle were supposed to be having brunch with their daughter, Romy, and oldest son, Jake. But something felt off. Michelle hadn't responded to Romy's last message. Rob hadn't answered Jake's call from the night before. And Nick? Nick had been silent for 2 days, holed up in the guest house. Again, by 9:32 a.m., Romy pulled into the driveway. Alone. By 9:35 a.m., she was screaming into her phone. Send help. I think my brother did this. Please hurry. I think my brother did this. We'll get to what she saw. We'll get to how she knew. But for now, let's go back just 3 days. 3 days before Rob Reiner was murdered in his own home. 3 days before Nick Reiner went from troubled son to accused killer. 3 days before Billy Crystal, his lifelong friend, opened a sealed envelope with shaking hands and read that one final line that would echo through courtrooms, headlines, and every corner of Hollywood. Let's talk about that letter. Because that one sentence, my son Nicholas shall receive nothing from my estate, for reasons he knows well, wasn't an accident. It wasn't written in a fit of rage. It wasn't a scribbled note on a napkin. It was deliberate, typed, signed, notarized, witnessed, and filed exactly 72 hours before Rob Reiner died. Here's the thing. Most wills are clinical, legal, safe. They don't bleed. This one did. According to the family's attorney, who tried, unsuccessfully, to have the will sealed, that line had been added at the last minute. The original will from 2022 split the estate equally between the 3 children, Jake, Romy, and Nick. But in the updated version, dated just 3 days before the murders, Nick's name was slashed from the document like a character cut from a final draft. No explanation, no apology, just that one devastating line. And according to those who've seen the footage, when Billy Crystal read it aloud in the lawyer's office, Romy gasped. Jake sat frozen. But Nick? Nick laughed. That's when things began to unravel. Because you see, Billy Crystal wasn't just the reader of the will. He was Rob's best friend, his confidant, and, reportedly, the only person Rob trusted in those final days. According to court records, it was Billy who received a late-night call from Rob just a week before his death. Rob sounded tired, distant, scared. I don't know what to do with Nick anymore, he allegedly said. I think he hates me. Billy tried to calm him, told him to take a breath. But Rob wouldn't listen. I'm rewriting everything, he said. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll read it. That was the moment. That was the moment everything changed. And Billy knew it. Because what kind of man rewrites his will in fear of his own son? But let's not pretend this came out of nowhere. Nick Reiner wasn't a stranger to drama. He had demons. Everyone in the industry knew it. A history of addiction, anger issues, quiet whispers on film sets about unpredictable behavior, rehab stints, fights, more rehab. Still, Rob protected him. Over and over. funded his projects, kept him close, moved him into the guest house after his third relapse. People called it tough love, but others wondered, was it enabling? Because by the time of the murder, Nick wasn't just living off his father's name. He was living on his father's property. And that's what made the crime scene so chilling. No signs of forced entry. No security alarms triggered. No strange footprints. Just blood. Everywhere. And a locked door Nick had access to. And then there was Romy, 27 years old. The youngest. The one who, by all accounts, was closest to Michelle. The one who discovered the bodies. In the 911 call, leaked and later verified, you can hear her sobbing, saying over and over, he did it. I know he did it. She told the dispatcher about the tension, the arguments, the screaming she heard 2 nights earlier. She told police that her father had been planning something that would upset Nick. Was that the will? She said, quote, my mom said Nick found out. And she was scared, really scared. That one sentence set the LAPD on a direct course to the guest house. And what they found there? Well, we'll get to that. But first, we have to understand what Nick's reasons he knows well actually were. Because while the rest of the world is still guessing, someone already knows. Someone who saw it all unfold. And someone who warned Rob long before the ink dried on that will. Her name is Tracy Reiner. Rob's adopted daughter. The one who had been quiet for years. The one who didn't even show up to the first court hearing. She stayed silent. Until now. And what she revealed behind closed doors. It turned the entire investigation upside down. But before we dive into that secret, we have to revisit the very last conversation between Rob and Nick. Because, as you'll soon find out, it wasn't just a father and son argument. It was a warning, and it ended with 5 chilling words. You'll regret this, old man. What really happened in the final hours before Rob and Michelle Reiner were killed? And more importantly, why was Nick the only one who walked away alive? It started like any other quiet Sunday in Brentwood. Birds in the jacaranda trees. Sprinklers ticking in manicured lawns. The kind of slow, wealthy calm that screams, nothing bad happens here. But behind the gates of 1389, Stonebrick Lane, something was already going terribly wrong. Rob Reiner, 78, and his wife Michelle, 70, were supposed to host brunch for their children that morning. Fresh bagels, smoked salmon, Michelle's famous grapefruit tart. Jake and Romy were invited. Nick was already on the property, living, as usual, in the guest house tucked behind the tennis courts. It was supposed to be a family day. Instead, it turned into a bloodbath. The timeline, as pieced together from phone records, surveillance footage, and the housekeeper's testimony, is chilling. 7:02 a.m. Rob walks into the kitchen barefoot, still in his robe. Makes coffee. He's alone. 7:14 a.m. Michelle enters. She's dressed already, hair wrapped in a towel. She pulls the grapefruit tart from the fridge. They share a moment, captured on the fridge camera. 7:22 a.m. A call comes in. Rob answers. The call lasts less than 45 seconds. He's visibly tense afterward. He stares at the floor. Doesn't speak. That call has never been publicly confirmed, but insiders believe it was from Nick. 7:34 a.m. The housekeeper, Elena, arrives through the back gate. She notices the guest house light is on, unusually early. She hears something, a loud noise, like something falling, but she brushes it off. Maybe a dropped pan? 8:01 a.m. Romy texts Michelle. Still on for brunch? Need anything? No response. 8:15 a.m. Elena says she heard raised voices. 2 people, male and female, arguing. She can't make out the words, but she's certain it was Rob and Michelle. The tone? She calls it desperate. 8:40 a.m. The camera facing the front hallway freezes. For exactly 17 minutes. It comes back online at 8:57. This is where the investigation gets murky. The footage during those 17 minutes? Corrupted. Experts later confirmed it was tampered with, manually. But here's the most disturbing part. During those 17 minutes, no one entered. No one left. Meaning, whatever happened, happened between the walls. And whoever did it was already inside. Let that sit for a second. By 9:17 a.m., Elena still hasn't seen or heard from Rob or Michelle. She knocks on their bedroom door. No answer. 9:22 a.m. Romy calls again. No one picks up. 9:31 a.m. Romy's silver Lexus pulls into the driveway. What happened next would scar her forever. She walks through the front door. No alarm. No sound. At first, she thinks maybe they're in the garden. Then she sees the shattered vase. The blood trail. The silence. 9:33 a.m. She opens the master bedroom door. And she screams. It's a scream that echoes through the call audio. That shakes even the dispatcher. Because what Romy found wasn't just a scene of horror, it was personal. Rob on the ground. Face turned. Hands frozen in a half-raised defensive pose. Michelle against the bed. Eyes wide open. One hand clutching her chest. The other stretched toward her husband. No sign of forced entry. No robbery. Nothing stolen. Only one thing missing. Nick. Romy's 911 call lasted 6 minutes and 11 seconds. Portions were redacted. But what we do know is bone-chilling. Dispatcher, can you tell me what happened? Romy, sobbing, they're dead. Oh my God. My mom. My dad. There's blood everywhere. Dispatcher, ma'am, is anyone else in the home with you? Romy, no. No. He's not here. I told them this would happen. I told them. Silence. He's gone. He's gone. Dispatcher, who's gone? Romy, Nick. Let's pause there. Imagine being 27, finding both your parents murdered, and the first person that comes to mind, the one person you immediately suspect, is your brother. Not a burglar. Not a stranger. Your brother. What does that tell you? What kind of relationship was this? The truth is, the Reiner family had been quietly unraveling behind the scenes for years. And that Sunday was not the start, it was the finale. Multiple sources later confirmed that in the weeks leading up to the murder, tension between Rob and Nick had hit a boiling point. Arguments, threats, even physical altercations. One source close to the family said Rob had finally drawn the line. And that line was the will. Let's rewind to 3 nights before the murder. It was Thursday. According to the attorney's office, Rob and Michelle had come in together. Quiet, firm, serious. They sat down, pulled out a folder. We want to make changes, Rob said. By the end of the meeting, Nick was out of the estate. Completely. No explanation. Just one line. My son Nicholas shall receive nothing from my estate, for reasons he knows well. That's not legalese. That's a statement. A wound. The lawyer reportedly asked, Are you sure you want to word it like that? Rob didn't blink. Michelle didn't object. It was done. Filed. Witnessed. Sealed. And the only other person who knew? Billy Crystal. Back to Sunday. Police arrive at 9:47 a.m. By 10:10, the guest house is surrounded. But Nick is already gone. He left the house sometime between 8:57 a.m. and 9:20 a.m. No one saw him leave. But what's even stranger? The guest house security camera, offline. Disabled from the inside. And inside the guest house. Chaos. Police found signs of a hurried exit. A duffel bag, open. Clothes missing. But also something deeply disturbing. A notebook. Torn pages. Cryptic phrases. One phrase repeated again and again, scribbled in thick black ink. I made him. He owes me everything. Let that sink in. And here's where it gets even darker. Inside Nick's guest house closet, police found a small, locked fireproof box. Inside, one item. A copy of the old will. The original one, before Nick was removed. How did Nick get it? Who gave it to him? Or had he been watching, waiting, listening? Authorities suspect Nick found out he was being cut out. But when? And how? We'll answer that later, because it's tied to a confession that happened weeks before, involving someone no one expected to speak. But back to the timeline. After discovering the scene, police issued an arrest warrant for Nicholas Reiner. It didn't take long to find him. By 5:03 p.m., less than 8 hours after the bodies were discovered, Nick was spotted at a gas station in Riverside, 70 miles away. He was calm, cool, bought a Gatorade, paid in cash. But he didn't see the police cruiser waiting near the off-ramp. By 5:19 p.m., he was in custody. He said only one thing during the arrest. You're making a mistake. I didn't do anything. They pushed me. And that sentence, they pushed me, would become the centerpiece of what came next. Because Nick wasn't just angry. He believed he had been wronged. But the question that still haunts everyone is, wronged by what? That's the question prosecutors, family, and even Billy Crystal are still trying to answer. And the clues? They may lie in a letter Rob wrote, but never sent. A letter hidden away in a drawer, dated exactly 3 days before his death. A A letter that began with the words, "To my son Nick, I loved you once." What does a daughter do when she sees the unthinkable and immediately knows her brother did it? The front door creaked open. Romy Reiner didn't think she was walking into a crime scene. She thought she was late for brunch. But the moment she stepped inside her childhood home, the silence hit her like a wall. The air was too still. The house felt wrong, not just quiet. "Dead." She called out, "Mom?" No answer. "Dad?" Still nothing. She stepped into the foyer, her heels clicking on the marble floor, each step echoing louder than the last. The smell hit her next. Metallic, thick, foreign, like something had spilled and never been cleaned up. She turned the corner toward the living room. And that's when she saw it. Not the bodies. Not yet. But something else. Something small. A shattered photograph on the floor. The frame cracked. Glass glittering in a thin trail across the hallway. And in the photo? Her father. Her mother. And Nick. Smiling. But just barely. What was that photo doing on the floor? It had always been on the mantel. Always. Now it was broken. Just like everything else. Romy's phone slipped from her hand. She didn't even realize it as it clattered to the tile. Because when she stepped further into the hallway, she saw the trail. A streak. Crimson. Faint at first, then thicker. It led toward the master bedroom. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." But she followed it. Because deep down, she already knew. When she pushed open the bedroom door, she didn't scream right away. She froze. Her mind refused to accept what her eyes were seeing. Her father, on the floor, his hand still half raised, eyes open, his mouth slightly parted, like he had tried to say something, tried to beg. Her mother, against the edge of the bed, her back twisted, her face pale, her lips drawn back in a frozen gasp of pain and disbelief. One hand outstretched, the other over her chest, as if she'd tried to stop the bleeding, tried to hold her heart inside her body. There was blood on the walls, the bedding, the floor, but there was something else, too. The air felt thick, like it had swallowed a scream and never let it go. Romy blinked, and then she screamed. The 911 call still haunts investigators. 6 minutes and 11 seconds of raw panic. Gasping breath, disbelief cracking her voice. But what stood out most wasn't just her fear. It was her certainty. "Dispatcher, ma'am, I need you to tell me exactly what happened." Romy, sobbing, "They're dead. Oh God. Oh my God. Dispatcher, are you in danger? Is the suspect still in the home?" Romy, "No. He's gone. He's gone. He was here. I told them this would happen. I told them." Dispatcher, "Ma'am, who do you think did this?" Romy, "Nick. My brother. I think he did this. I know he did this." That moment, that certainty, it sent shivers down every officer's spine. Because she didn't hesitate. She didn't guess. She knew. But how? What had happened in the days, years, leading up to this that would make a sister be so sure her own brother had done the unthinkable? The answer lies in what Romy had seen before. According to her later statement, Romy hadn't been living at the estate, but she visited regularly. She had noticed things. Small things. The way Michelle flinched when Nick entered a room. The way Rob kept his eyes on him during dinner. The way doors were locked when they never used to be. And then there was Thursday night. 3 nights before the murders. Romy had come over late to drop off some script pages for her dad. She wasn't supposed to stay long. Just a quick hello. She walked past the guest house on her way in, and that's when she heard it. Yelling. A voice, Nick's, raging. Furious. Not drunk. Not high. Just dark. And then another voice, Rob's. Firm. Quiet. Final. Romy couldn't make out every word. But she heard one line clear as a bell. "You're out, Nick. That's it. No more second chances." She didn't know what it meant then, but now she did. And it wasn't just that. She told police something else. Something that chilled them. 2 weeks before the murder, Romy had been helping her mom clean out an old cabinet. Inside, tucked behind some holiday linens, was a sealed envelope. On the front, "To be opened only in the event of my death." Signed, Rob Reiner. Romy had laughed nervously. "Mom, what is this?" But Michelle didn't laugh. She looked Romy straight in the eyes and said, "Your father's afraid of what Nick might do." That was 2 weeks before. And now, the envelope was gone. Let's pause for a moment. This isn't a movie. This isn't a script. This is real. A daughter walks into her parents' house and finds both of them murdered. She remembers the envelope, the yelling, the way her mother trembled just a little too long every time Nick's name came up. What would you think? Would you hesitate? Would you wait for evidence? Or would you, like Romy, pick up the phone and say the name you've been dreading for years? Nick. But here's the twist. Romy didn't just think Nick did it. She had proof, at least in her mind, because just days earlier, she had seen something in his room, something she wasn't supposed to see, and it changed everything. It was a journal, open on the desk in the guest house. Romy wasn't snooping. She was looking for an HDMI cable, but the page caught her eye. In Nick's handwriting, scrawled over and over again. He took everything. I gave him my life. And now he's cutting me out. Another page. He made me into this. This is his doing. His blood will clean the slate. Romy froze. She stepped away. Didn't say anything. Didn't tell her dad. Or her mom. But the words haunted her. And when she saw that broken photo, when she saw the blood, she knew. She knew it was already too late. When detectives arrived, Romy was sitting on the front steps, shaking, silent, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She looked up at one of the officers and said, "Please find him before he hurts someone else." The officer nodded. But here's the thing. They didn't need to find Nick. They just had to follow the breadcrumbs he left behind. Because while Romy was the first to speak, she wasn't the last. And the next person to break their silence would be someone the world had all but forgotten. Tracy Reiner, the quiet one, the adopted daughter, the one who had distanced herself from the family years earlier. But now, she was back, and what she knew would shock even the most hardened detectives. Why would a 32-year-old man, son of Hollywood royalty, hide away in a guest house just steps from the mansion he once called home? And what, exactly, was he hiding inside those walls? From the outside, the guest house on the Reiner estate looked like a dream. Modern architecture, private entrance, a wraparound deck shaded by lemon trees, glass walls that overlooked the pool and gardens. But inside, it was a different world. Because Nick Reiner wasn't living like someone successful. He was living like someone exiled. The furniture was sparse, lights dim, books stacked high like barricades, dishes piled in the sink. Curtains always drawn. The air smelled like cigarette smoke and something older, staler, like regret. To neighbors and delivery drivers, it was just a second home, a luxury addition to a rich family's estate. But to Nick, it was a cage, one he'd built himself. And on the night of the murders, that cage cracked wide open. Police entered the guest house at 10:14 a.m., guns drawn. No resistance. No Nick. He had already fled. But what they found inside told a story far more disturbing than any escape route. The couch cushions were slashed, a mirror broken, Sharpie writing on the bathroom walls, rants, names, half-formed thoughts. And then, the journal, the same one Romy had seen. Pages ripped out, others underlined aggressively, phrases circled again and again. He promised me everything. He left me nothing. Erased them before they erased me. This wasn't just rage. It was planned. And there was more. Tucked under Nick's bed, wrapped in an old hoodie, was a printed copy of Rob Reiner's 2022 will, the one before Nick had been disinherited, marked with a red X beside his own name. Next to it, a crumpled printout of an email thread, unverified, but allegedly between Rob and the family's estate attorney. It discussed amendments to the trust and included one damning line. Subject to change pending Nicholas' behavior this quarter. You read that right. Rob was essentially giving his son a probation period, like an employee on a final warning. And Nick? He knew it. Let's rewind a bit. Nick Reiner was once considered a Hollywood prodigy, son of Rob, grandson of Carl, creative blood in his veins. But behind the camera smiles and red carpet appearances, Nick was struggling hard. He battled addiction from his early teens. Pills, alcohol, cocaine. In and out of rehab by age 20. Public breakdowns. Tabloid rumors. A DUI swept under the rug. Still, Rob never gave up on him. He wrote a screenplay with Nick in 2015, a semi-autobiographical piece about addiction called Being Charlie. It was supposed to be a turning point. Instead, it was a brief flicker in a long, dark slide. Because when the film failed at the box office, something in Nick seemed to break. He thought his dad could fix everything, one source said. And when Rob couldn't, Nick turned that failure inward, then outward. And that brings us back to the guest house. Police found something else in the bedroom closet. A locked fireproof box. Inside, a knife. But not the knife used in the murders. This one was older, rusted, still in its leather case. Taped to it, a note. For when words don't work. Chilling, but not illegal. Not proof. Still, it painted a picture of paranoia, resentment, and obsession. Nick had become consumed by the idea that his father had abandoned him, that he was being replaced, that Romy and Jake were conspiring against him. And the final straw? The new will. He knew. But how? That's the question investigators kept coming back to. Because Rob and Michelle had updated the will just 3 days before their murder. Only the lawyer, Billy Crystal, and the witnesses knew. So how did Nick find out? The answer may lie in a tiny device found taped under the dining room table. A listening device. One that transmitted to a paired Bluetooth app. And the account tied to that app? Nick Reiner's. That's right. He was listening. To dinners. To arguments. To secrets. He had bugged his own family's home. And that's how he knew. He didn't need someone to tell him. He heard it. Rob telling Michelle, he's not getting a dime. Michelle whispering, he'll be furious. Romy warning, he might snap. All of it. Captured. Stored. Played over and over again inside his head. Until it broke him. But here's where things get even darker. The walls of the guest house weren't just hiding physical evidence. They were hiding something emotional. Something that no one saw coming. Because in a hidden compartment inside the bedside table, behind a false drawer, investigators found something completely unexpected. A stack of letters. All written by Rob. All unsent. All addressed to Nick. Letters dating back years. Some apologizing. Some begging. Some raging. One in particular stood out. It was dated 2 years earlier. After a public incident involving Nick at a film festival in Toronto. It read, I've spent my entire life defending you, Nick. But I can't protect you from yourself. Not anymore. If you want to be my son again, you have to stop being my enemy. Another letter, written only months before the murder, said, You scare your mother. And that scares me. I don't recognize you anymore. Heartbreaking, but also revealing. Because Rob wasn't just cutting Nick off financially. He was cutting him off emotionally. And Nick? He took it as betrayal. Let's not forget. Nick lived just steps away from the main house. Every holiday, every family gathering, every late-night laugh he wasn't invited to. He watched. Through windows. Through walls. Through security cameras he'd learned to manipulate. His journal revealed a chilling phrase. You can be in the same place and still be completely alone. That was the guest house. A prison with a pool view. So when Rob finally updated the will, when he made it official, when he wrote that devastating line, My son Nicholas shall receive nothing from my estate, for reasons he knows well. Nick snapped. He saw it not as a rejection, but as erasure, as a death sentence. And if that was how his father saw him, then maybe the only way to be remembered was to become unforgettable. But Nick wasn't the only one keeping secrets in that guest house. Because when police scoured the digital logs on Nick's devices, they found one final twist. A folder on his desktop, password protected, named simply The Truth. Inside, a series of audio files, recorded over months. Private conversations, fights, pleas. But one recording, only 43 seconds long, stood out. It's Rob, talking to someone, likely Billy. He says, I'm scared he's going to hurt her. I don't think he knows how to be anything but angry anymore. If something happens to me, don't let him get a single cent. End of recording. Just static. But in that static was motive, fear, finality. And that was the last straw. Nick ran. After the murder, after the panic, he grabbed a bag, grabbed some cash, grabbed that recording, and vanished. But not for long. Because a gas station camera 70 miles away caught him on tape. Calm, composed, sipping a Gatorade. A man with no remorse. No regret. Just silence. But the silence wouldn't last. Because someone else had been watching. Someone who had known the Reiners longer than anyone else. Someone who had distanced herself from the family, but never truly left. Tracy Reiner. And when she finally broke her silence, she didn't just confirm what people feared. She exposed something no one saw coming. And it all began with a letter she received. From Michelle, 3 days before the murder. What do you write when you know your son might destroy you? And what if the truth you write down never gets read until it's too late? It wasn't addressed with affection. No, dear Nick. No, to my son. No warmth. Just a date, a signature, and 4 typed words. This is my truth. The letter was tucked away in a drawer Rob Reiner had kept locked for years. It wasn't hidden inside a file cabinet or placed in a safe. No, it was right in his nightstand, within reach. Almost like he wanted someone to find it after he was gone. But not just anyone. Someone who would understand what it meant. Someone who already knew how bad things had become. That someone was Tracy Reiner. Tracy wasn't present at the initial will reading. She wasn't even in California when the murders happened. She had moved to Oregon years prior, quiet, private, tired of Hollywood drama. She rarely gave interviews, kept to herself, worked in theater, volunteered at a shelter. But 3 days after the bodies were discovered, she showed up, unannounced. No cameras, no press. She walked into LAPD's West LA station holding a sealed envelope with Rob Reiner's handwriting across the front, and 2 sentences that would shake the entire case. He wrote this for me, and I think he knew he wouldn't be able to send it. Let's rewind. According to Tracy, she and Rob had spoken less frequently in recent years. The tension between her and Nick had grown unbearable. They'd clashed over family issues, therapy, inheritance, allegiances. But one thing never changed. Rob trusted Tracy. And 3 days before his murder, she received a short email from her father. Subject line: if anything happens. No body text. No greeting. Just an attachment. A scanned letter. A draft. It wasn't labeled a will. It wasn't legally binding. It was something else entirely. A confession. The letter began with a sentence that dropped like lead. I've spent more than a decade trying to save Nick from himself, but I'm finally ready to admit, I failed. Rob didn't hold back. He described how Nick had grown darker over the years, how outbursts had turned into threats, how the family had walked on eggshells for years. He detailed specific incidents, most of which were never made public. A physical altercation in 2019, where Nick allegedly threw a glass ashtray at Jake. An incident at Michelle's birthday dinner, where Nick reportedly grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. A family therapy session where Nick shouted, "You're all fakes. You'll be sorry when I'm gone, or when you are." But the most heartbreaking passage? I have watched Michelle shrink in his presence. I have seen fear in her eyes and denial in mine. That's on me. Let that sink in. This wasn't just a father acknowledging a troubled child. It was a man confessing complicity, weakness, guilt. And then came the twist. Rob claimed that Nick had threatened him, directly, on multiple occasions. He's told me things a son should never say to a father. That he'd ruin me. That he'd take what I owed him by force if I didn't wake up. That he'd rather see this family burn than fade. Rob wrote that he had consulted lawyers, considered a restraining order, even thought about involving the police. But he always pulled back. Why? Because he was a father. Because he hoped Nick would change. Because, as he put it, I didn't want my legacy to be putting my own son in prison. But Rob was also clear about one thing. If anything happens to me or to Michelle, please know this wasn't random. Please know Nick wasn't a victim. And please don't let him inherit anything from me. That sentence, just that sentence, would later be used as the emotional backbone of the prosecution's opening statement in court. Because when someone predicts their own death, people listen. Tracy kept the email secret until the police announced Nick's arrest. That's when everything changed. She flew to Los Angeles, handed the printed letter over, and told detectives, "You're looking for motive? There it is." But here's where things took a darker turn. The letter wasn't just sent to Tracy. It had been printed, twice, once for her, and once for Rob's lawyer. Only the lawyer never got his copy, because someone intercepted it. That second copy, gone. Deleted from Rob's email sent folder, traced to a draft-only recovery tool, accessed from a device never identified. Investigators now believe Nick, through surveillance or device access, may have seen the letter before Rob ever finished sending it. And that's when the spiral began. Imagine being Nick. Imagine reading those words before they were ever meant for your eyes. Your father calling you dangerous, calling you broken, saying you didn't deserve a cent. Imagine watching that love, conditional, already fragile, turn into documented rejection. Would you walk away? Or would you try to silence the voice that exposed you? That's the question investigators asked. That's the question prosecutors circled like vultures. And it wasn't the only evidence they had, because alongside the unsent letter was something even more disturbing. A voice memo. Rob had recorded a memo on his phone, dated the same day as the letter. It began casually, quietly, just Rob's voice. Tired. Measured. If I'm recording this, it's because I need someone to hear it, in case the written word doesn't survive. He then goes on. Nick found the draft. He confronted me. He said I was turning Romy and Jake against him. Said I was poisoning Mom's mind. He said, and I quote, "If I'm out of your will, you're out of my life. Permanently." Rob takes a breath. You can hear it. Like he's weighing whether to keep going. He does. I don't want to believe he'd ever hurt us. But then again, I never thought we'd get here. If anything happens, please don't make excuses for him. Tell the truth, even if it hurts. Click. End of recording. And with it, a man's final, silent cry for help. The recording, letter, and Tracy's statement were entered into the official investigation, and the court case began to shift. This wasn't just circumstantial anymore. This wasn't just a matter of broken cameras and suspicious timelines. This was premeditated. A father writing his final thoughts. A son allegedly discovering them. A fuse lit. A family burned. But one question remained. If Rob was so afraid, why didn't he take action? Why not file the restraining order? Why not move Nick off the property? Why not tell Romy or Jake or Tracy everything? That's the contradiction that hurts the most. Because Rob Reiner, strong on camera, commanding on stage, revered by millions, was, in the end, still just a dad. A dad who didn't want to give up on his son. A dad who kept hoping for a turnaround that never came. As Tracy later told the Los Angeles Times, he kept choosing hope. Even when fear was screaming at him, he kept loving Nick. Until it killed him. The letter was never supposed to be public. But now, it's the key to understanding everything. Because when you read a father's words, begging to be believed posthumously, you can't unhear them. You can't unsee the truth. And the next person to face that truth was Billy Crystal. Because when the court asked who would be strong enough to read Rob's final will aloud, Billy didn't hesitate. He stood up, took the envelope, and opened it. But when he reached that line, the one about Nick, he paused. His hands shook. And what happened next shattered the entire room. What if the murder of Rob and Michelle Reiner wasn't a shock? What if it was the culmination of years of warnings that everyone ignored? It didn't begin with blood. It began with slammed doors, with shouting matches that rattled through the walls of a Beverly Hills mansion, with broken windows that were always accidents, and bruises that were from a fall. It began with silence. Because the truth is, Nick Reiner didn't just snap one day. He boiled for years. And the first time he boiled over, really boiled over, something happened that the family never recovered from. But they buried it. They told themselves it wasn't that bad. They told themselves it wouldn't happen again. They were wrong. It was August 2009. Nick was 16. He had just come home from rehab for the second time. Rob and Michelle thought a summer in the Hamptons would help. New environment. Distance from LA, private therapy. No press. But Nick hated it. He hated the therapists. He hated the rules. Most of all, he hated feeling like he was being watched, like his every move was measured, analyzed, judged. According to Tracy Reiner, who was there that summer, Nick became increasingly volatile. He was always angry, she recalled in her deposition. But this was different. This was calculated, cold. He didn't yell all the time. Sometimes he just sat in silence, watching. Then one night, it exploded. The family was having dinner. Just the core five. Rob, Michelle, Jake, Romy, and Nick. Tracy had stepped out. They were discussing Jake's college film project. Something about documentary storytelling and memory. It was light, warm, safe. Until Rob said something offhand. Nick, maybe you could shadow Jake this fall. Could be good structure for you. Nick's fork hit the table like a gunshot. He stood up, shoved his chair back so hard it knocked over Romy's drink. And he said, loud, clear, "Stop trying to fix me. You only care when there's a camera pointed at us." Rob was stunned. Jake tried to de-escalate. Romy cried. Michelle stood up and said, "Nick, enough. Sit down." That's when Nick threw the wine glass. It missed her head by inches, shattered against the wall. And in that moment, Michelle didn't say a word. She just sat down, quiet, defeated. That was the first time the family truly saw rage in Nick. But it wouldn't be the last. After that night, Nick spiraled again. He left the Hamptons early, checked himself out of outpatient care without permission, and disappeared for 3 days. When he returned, he was high. He got into a screaming match with Rob in the driveway. Neighbors reported hearing it. One even called the police. But by the time officers arrived, Rob waved them off. Just a family argument, he said. Everything's fine. But everything wasn't fine. Not then. Not ever again. That summer became a turning point. It was the first time the family stopped pretending things were normal. Rob began locking his office at night. Michelle removed all sharp objects from the kitchen. Jake started spending less time at home. Romy began therapy, alone. And Nick? He kept escalating. Nick is 18. He's working on a student film. Rob helps him fund it, even offers his own editor. But when Nick is told the studio won't pick it up for a festival, due to concerns over its disturbing content, he doesn't take it well. He shows up at the studio, screams at a producer, throws a stapler across the room. Security escorts him out. Rob pays for the damages. No press. No coverage. Quiet. But inside the family, another fracture. A leaked text exchange between Nick and a young actress he had dated briefly. She accuses him of being controlling. Says he once locked her out of his apartment during an argument. She texts, "You're scaring me." He replies, "Good. That's how I know you're listening." She never presses charges. Rob's team reportedly intervenes behind the scenes. More silence. More broken things swept under the carpet. By 2015, things seem to improve. Nick co-writes Being Charlie with his father. The film debuts at Toronto International Film Festival. It's a semi-autobiographical story about addiction, family, redemption. The public sees it as a healing moment. A father and son working through trauma on screen. But insiders say it was the opposite. One crew member, who asked not to be named, recalled. They fought constantly. Rob rewrote half the script. Nick felt overshadowed. He told me once, "This isn't my story anymore. He's stealing it." The film gets mixed reviews. Box office flop. Nick vanishes again. By 2018, Rob reportedly cut off Nick's monthly allowance. Nick responds by crashing Romy's graduation dinner. He isn't invited. Shows up drunk. Yells at his father in front of guests. Michelle begs him to leave. He throws a chair. Police are not called. But that's when Rob sends the first draft of a will removing Nick from the estate. A draft he later retracts. Because, again, he chooses hope. He always chose hope. Until hope became dangerous. There's one final incident. One the family never spoke of publicly. Until the trial. According to Tracy's sworn testimony, it happened in 2021. Nick was staying in the guest house. Unannounced. Rob had just wrapped a project. He was tired. Stressed. They got into an argument over dinner. About legacy, apparently. About being left out. Nick allegedly said, "If you don't let me in, you'll see what I do when I'm locked out." That night, Michelle found Nick in the main house at 3:15 a.m. Standing at the foot of their bed, holding a flashlight. He said he was looking for his charger, but he didn't have a phone on him. That was the moment. The moment Rob told Tracy he was scared. The moment Michelle asked about moving. The moment Jake suggested installing new locks. The moment Romy said, "If something ever happens, it'll be him." But no one pressed charges. Because he was family. And family doesn't call the cops. Even when it should. So when the murders happened? When Rob and Michelle were found stabbed to death. When Nick was arrested hours later. It wasn't a surprise to those who really knew what had been brewing. It was inevitable. A slow, suffocating boil that ended in blood. But the real question is, what did Nick believe he was owed? And how far was he willing to go to take it? The answer may lie in a conversation caught on audio between Rob and the one man he still confided in, Billy Crystal. A conversation that happened just days before the murder. One where Rob said something even darker than his will. He said, "Nick said if he didn't get what he deserved, he'd take it. And he'd make sure we couldn't stop him." Billy tried to talk him down. But Rob was done talking. And when Billy Crystal was handed the envelope to read in court, no one expected what happened next. Because the words Rob left behind, they weren't just legal. They were lethal. And they would tear what was left of the Reiner family apart. What do you do when your best friend tells you he's afraid of his own son? And what if you're the one left to tell the world, after it's already too late? Billy Crystal had never been at a loss for words. He'd hosted the Oscars, delivered eulogies, commanded stages, made millions laugh, cry, and think. His voice was a comforting staple in American entertainment. But when he stood inside the Westwood legal office to read Rob Reiner's will, he wasn't a comedian. He wasn't a performer. He was a broken man. He held the sealed envelope with trembling hands. He cleared his throat, and he read. But when he got to that line, "My son Nicholas shall receive nothing from my estate, for reasons he knows well," he stopped. He looked up. His eyes welled. He whispered, "Oh, Rob," and the room shattered. Let's rewind. Billy Crystal and Rob Reiner had been friends since the late 1970s. A bond forged through showbiz chaos, shared values, and fatherhood. They'd celebrated together, grieved together, survived Hollywood together. So when Rob called Billy in the middle of the night, just a week before the murders, Billy answered on the first ring. And what Rob said, it wasn't small talk. It was a confession. According to sources close to Billy, Rob had reached a breaking point. He told Billy, "I think Nick is going to hurt someone. Maybe me. Maybe Michelle." Billy reportedly sat upright in bed, shocked. "What are you saying, Rob? You think he's dangerous?" Rob didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I've already written the new will. He's out. I can't do this anymore." Billy urged him to take precautions. "Move out. Call the police. Bring in a lawyer." Rob refused. "I just need you to promise me one thing." "What?" "If something happens, you'll be the one to read it." Billy tried to say no. He begged him to wait, to rethink. But Rob was adamant. And so, 7 days later, Billy found himself standing before a stunned group of family members. Jake, Romy, Tracy, several attorneys, and reading a document that no one ever wanted to hear out loud. The atmosphere in the room? Electric. Stifled. The moment Billy read that infamous line about Nick, Romy gasped. Jake gripped the armrest so hard his knuckles turned white. And Tracy? Tracy nodded. Slowly. Almost like she'd seen it coming all along. But Billy? Billy broke. He stopped mid-sentence, put the pages down, and spoke from the heart. He said, Rob didn't want to hurt anyone. He wanted peace, but he also wanted the truth. He loved his children, all of them, but he had to make a choice. A hard one, a final one. He paused, looked at the lawyers, then at the cameras, then at the ceiling. He told me once, "Billy, legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you protect." He made this will because he wanted to protect the ones still standing. Then Billy picked the papers back up, finished reading. Silence hung in the air like fog. No one moved. And Nick? Nick wasn't there, but he'd feel the aftershock from hundreds of miles away. Billy later told reporters it was the hardest moment of his life. Harder than his father's funeral. Harder than hosting the Oscars the year after September 11th. Harder than anything he'd ever had to say aloud. Because it wasn't just a legal document. It was a cry for help. And he knew, deep down, that Rob had been trying to send that cry for months. But no one could stop what was already coming. What most people don't know is that Rob left Billy something else. A handwritten letter. Not to be read aloud. Not for the press. Just for Billy. It said, "You've always been my voice of reason. If I couldn't be there to say this, I needed you to say it for me. Don't let anyone twist the story. Don't let the truth die with me. Tell them what I saw, what I feared, what I knew." And so Billy did. Not just in that legal office, but on camera, in court, and eventually, on national television. 2 weeks after the murder, Billy Crystal appeared on 60 Minutes. He didn't want to, but Romy called him, said, "Dad would have trusted you to say it." So he sat down across from Anderson Cooper and told the story no one wanted to hear. Not from a lawyer, not from the press, but from a friend. He described the late-night calls, the worry in Rob's voice, the guilt, the quiet dread that had slowly grown louder over the years. He said, Rob loved Nick. He never stopped. But he feared him, too. He didn't want to admit that for a long time. And when he finally did, it was already too late. And then Anderson asked the question that left the world stunned. "Do you think Nick murdered his parents?" Billy didn't flinch. He looked straight into the camera and said, "I think Rob knew it was coming. That's why he asked me to speak after he was gone. That's why he wrote the will that way. Not to hurt Nick, but to warn the world, to leave no doubt." And when asked if he regretted anything, Billy answered, "I regret not going to the house that day. I regret not hugging him one more time. I regret not saying, let's leave town. Let's figure this out. He paused, then added, with a voice that cracked. But most of all, I regret that Rob died afraid of someone he once held in his arms. It was the most watched 60-minute segment of the year. Over 14 million views in the first 48 hours. Because for the first time, this wasn't just a tabloid story. It wasn't about inheritance, or Hollywood, or broken families. It was about friendship, about one man standing up to say what his best friend couldn't say for himself. It was about truth, and the unbearable weight of speaking it out loud. But the moment that truly broke the internet wasn't from the interview. It was from a leaked clip of Billy leaving the courthouse, just minutes after reading the will. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Crystal, how do you feel about Nick?" Billy paused, turned to the camera, and said, "I feel sorry for him, but I feel more sorry for the man who tried everything to save him and died for it." But there's one more secret Billy carried, one he hadn't yet shared, because Rob didn't just write a will. He left behind something else, a sealed recording, labeled only with a date. The day before his death, Billy had the only copy, and when he finally played it, it revealed something so personal, so raw, that even Billy Crystal, Hollywood veteran, comedic legend, the man who had held his friend's secrets, broke down in tears. Because in that recording, Rob said something no one expected. Something not about Nick, but about Romy, and what he feared would happen to her next. It was only 11 words. But when Billy Crystal read them aloud, the silence in the room said everything. "My son Nicholas shall receive nothing from my estate, for reasons he knows well." What were those reasons? And why didn't Rob Reiner spell them out? Legal experts called it cold. The tabloids called it a bullet in sentence form. But to those who knew Rob Reiner, it was a warning, a last line of defense from a father who no longer trusted his own son, and who wanted the world to know it. He could have written more. He could have explained, laid out a case, told the story behind the betrayal. But he didn't. Instead, he left just that brutal sentence. And in those 11 words, he let the public imagination run wild. But here's the thing. That sentence wasn't for the public. It wasn't even really for the lawyers. It was for Nick. And Nick alone. Because he knew. And that, Rob decided, was enough. Let's break it down. There's a reason people don't usually write wills this way. Lawyers advise against emotion, against personalization, against drama. But Rob ignored all of that. He wanted it on paper. He wanted it read aloud. And he wanted it heard after he was dead. Why? Because he didn't trust Nick not to twist the truth. And if he was going to be silenced, he'd make sure the last word was his. Here's where it gets even more complicated. The updated will was only filed 3 days before Rob and Michelle were murdered. That timing, intentional. According to the estate attorney, Rob had called just 24 hours before to confirm it had been signed and notarized. He asked, "Does it say exactly what I asked?" The lawyer replied, "Yes, Rob, word for word." Rob paused, then said, "Good, then he'll know I meant it." So what did Nick know well? What was he being punished for? Was it the threats? The violence? The years of manipulation, failed rehab, and stolen peace? Or was there something else? Something darker? That's the theory Romy couldn't shake. Because when she heard the sentence in Billy's voice, her blood ran cold. It wasn't just the wording. It was the look on Billy's face. The way he flinched when he read it. As if he'd seen what those reasons were, and wanted to forget them. Behind the scenes, Romy begged the lawyer for answers. Was there a sealed appendix? A private letter? Anything. The lawyer shook his head. No. That line was the explanation. She stormed out. But then, days later, something clicked. Romy remembered a moment from years earlier. A moment she'd buried. It was the summer of 2020. A tense time. COVID lockdowns. Everyone on edge. The family was isolating together at the Brentwood estate. An experiment in bonding that quickly unraveled. One night, she and Michelle were in the kitchen, prepping dinner. Rob was outside pacing on the phone. Nick had disappeared hours earlier. Romy asked casually, "Do you think things will ever be normal again?" Michelle paused, then said something cryptic. "Some things can't go back to normal once you realize who someone really is." Romy had laughed it off at the time. But now she couldn't stop replaying it in her head. There's another detail. A small but haunting one. The final copy of the will wasn't typed in Rob's usual font. It was courier. Like a script. A screenplay. It was as if Rob had decided to turn the end of his life into a scene. And that line, the brutal final beat before fade to black. Legal analysts debated it endlessly on cable news. Was it a spiteful jab? Was it strategic? Could Nick challenge the will in court? The answer to the last question was a firm no, because Rob had included something else, a poison pill clause, also known as an interorum clause. It stated that any heir who contests the will would forfeit everything, even if they won. In other words, if Nick fought it, he'd lose even more. And that enraged him. According to corrections officers, when Nick was shown the will while in custody, he didn't react at first. He stared at the paper, read it once, twice, then tore it in half, then screamed. He thinks he gets the last word? No, I do. The outburst was logged in the prison incident report. But it didn't end there. Nick reportedly told his cellmate, later subpoenaed as a witness. He always wrote the story, always made himself the good guy. I'm going to tell my story now. And people are going to see who he really was. Delusional, defensive, or dangerous. Maybe all three. But here's what's wild. Nick didn't just believe he was wronged. He believed he was the victim. In his mind, that sentence, for reasons he knows well, was a public execution. A character assassination, and he wanted revenge, not just for the inheritance, but for the humiliation, the legacy, the control. That's when his lawyers tried to spin the narrative. They began leaking stories. Nick was mentally unstable. Nick had been emotionally abused. Rob had gaslit him for years, but none of it stuck, because the evidence was overwhelming. The letters, the recordings, the pattern of violence, and most damning of all, a draft screenplay found in Nick's laptop, titled, The Son Who Wasn't Heard. It was fiction, but barely. It painted a portrait of a misunderstood genius, betrayed by his cold, distant father. And in the final scene, the son kills the father. Not in anger, but in art. As the character says, sometimes you have to end a story to write your own. Chilling, especially when prosecutors read that scene aloud in court. You could hear a pin drop. So when people ask, why did Rob write that one line? Why didn't he say more? The answer is, he didn't need to. Because Rob Reiner was a master storyteller. And in those 11 words, he said everything. He delivered heartbreak, anger, regret, finality. He left his audience, his son, the public, the world, stunned. And he left his daughter Romy with a question that haunted her in court. Was that line the last thing he ever wrote? Because he knew it would be the last thing anyone ever heard from him. But that wasn't the end. Because Romy, now consumed with grief and fury, decided to open a room in the house that had been sealed for over a decade. A room only her father had access to. The one place Nick had always been forbidden to enter. And what she found inside would rip open a deeper truth. Not just about Nick, but about Rob himself. What does a daughter do when she sees the unthinkable and immediately knows her brother did it? The front door creaked open. Romy Reiner didn't think she was walking into a crime scene. She thought she was late for brunch. But the moment she stepped inside her childhood home, the silence hit her like a wall. The air was too still. The house felt wrong, not just quiet. Dead. She called out, "Mom?" No answer. "Dad?" Still nothing. She stepped into the foyer, her heels clicking on the marble floor, each step echoing louder than the last. The smell hit her next. Metallic, thick, foreign, like something had spilled and never been cleaned up. She turned the corner toward the living room. And that's when she saw it. Not the bodies. Not yet. But something else. Something small. A shattered photograph on the floor. The frame cracked. Glass glittering in a thin trail across the hallway. And in the photo, her father, her mother, and Nick, smiling, but just barely. What was that photo doing on the floor? It had always been on the mantel. Always. Now it was broken, just like everything else. Romy's phone slipped from her hand. She didn't even realize it as it clattered to the tile. Because when she stepped further into the hallway, she saw the trail. A streak. Crimson. Faint at first, then thicker. It led toward the master bedroom. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." But she followed it. Because deep down, she already knew. When she pushed open the bedroom door, she didn't scream right away. She froze. Her mind refused to accept what her eyes were seeing. Her father, on the floor, his hand still half raised, eyes open, his mouth slightly parted, like he had tried to say something, tried to beg. Her mother, against the edge of the bed, her back twisted, her face pale, her lips drawn back in a frozen gasp of pain and disbelief. One hand outstretched, the other over her chest, as if she'd tried to stop the bleeding, tried to hold her heart inside her body. There was blood on the walls, the bedding, the floor, but there was something else, too. The air felt thick, like it had swallowed a scream and never let it go. Romy blinked, and then she screamed. The 911 call still haunts investigators. 6 minutes and 11 seconds of raw panic, gasping breath, disbelief cracking her voice. But what stood out most wasn't just her fear. It was her certainty. Dispatcher, ma'am, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Romy, sobbing, they're dead. Oh God. Oh my God. Dispatcher, are you in danger? Is the suspect still in the home? Romy, no. He's gone. He's gone. He was here. I told them this would happen. I told them. Dispatcher, ma'am, who do you think did this? Romy, Nick. My brother. I think he did this. I know he did this. That moment, that certainty, it sent shivers down every officer's spine. Because she didn't hesitate. She didn't guess. She knew. But how? What had happened in the days, years, leading up to this that would make a sister be so sure her own brother had done the unthinkable? The answer lies in what Romy had seen before. According to her later statement, Romy hadn't been living at the estate, but she visited regularly. She had noticed things, small things. The way Michelle flinched when Nick entered a room. The way Rob kept his eyes on him during dinner. The way doors were locked when they never used to be. And then there was Thursday night. 3 nights before the murders. Romy had come over late to drop off some script pages for her dad. She wasn't supposed to stay long. Just a quick